Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Greetings, my name is Ariba Shabbir and we have been discussing English language teaching. Now we are going to study older and young learners creating profiles. Before we proceed further, let us recapitulate of what we did in the last session. In the last session, we discussed about the learners who are important components of any second language pedagogy. So, we understood that knowing the second language learner can help the educator design tasks and activities efficiently. Moreover, we discussed that learner-centered class is an important one and it encourages learning in an effective way. It encourages participants to take part in activities and express themselves freely. It is also important to look for the psychological, social, motivational and individual factors which are responsible for the growth of language learners. Moreover, we identified that it is important to learn the nature of the motivation as far as the second language learners are concerned. We talked about the importance of the prior knowledge which helps the learner absorb information efficiently and effectively. After this session, you will be able to understand the differences between teaching young and older learners. You will be able to distinguish between second language acquisition and second language learning. Moreover, you will be able to review the critical period hypothesis, behavioral approaches and universal grammar. Moreover, you will be able to create the learner's profile on the basis of their demographic information such as gender, age, ethnicity, location, etc. and their characteristics such as learning styles and preferences. So, dear learners, when we talk about young and older learners, we need to understand that what is the older learner and we need to understand who is the older learner and who is the young learner. So, let us look up at this slide and I will try to mention some of the key points which are important in considering young and older learners. So, as you see here, that it is important to look how a young learner is defined and how an older learner is defined. So, young learner is basically defined as any student which comes under the age of 18, right, and he or she looks for language education, or you can say that this person might be learning out of the course that is being given to him. Moreover, there is an adult, or you can say older learner, who is defined as any student over the age of 18 plus. And when we talk about young learner, we cannot forget that they come in varieties. Now, what is the variety of the young learners? They come in vast developmental changes that occur during their growth. For example, a 5-year-old would be a different learner than the learner who is 15-year-old. So, you know, when we talk about a 15-year-old learner, then we cannot forget that he or she has already taken up a lot of knowledge with regard to language. Therefore, we can say that the first of these very young learners, who include toddlers and preschoolers, typically come under the age of 7 years as well. I will write here toddlers, or you can say preschoolers. However, we find that these days students by the age of 3 and even less than 3, they get into school and they start learning language. So, how it is going to help them as far as their growth is concerned and their language learning and acquisition is concerned. So, there are some typical qualities of learners as far as adult learners are concerned and young learners are concerned. So, what are those qualities? Let us try to find out here. You know, when we teach to adult learners, we need to think of certain important matters. First is that older learners or you can say adult learners, they speak with lot of background knowledge, right. So, they have already made a special background of language learning and acquisition, or you can say that in classroom the teachers need to be aware in order to adapt their teaching methods, because if we look up their typical qualities, then one of the biggest advantages for a teacher of adult learners is that they typically have the choice to learn second language, right, and they pay a significant amount of money to do this. For this reason, adult learners are usually very motivated students, which means the teacher can focus on teaching as opposed to finding strategies to motivate an unmotivated class. However, there is a little difference when it comes to the young learners, because he or she is not learning out of his choice. He or she has come to school out of the parental force, or you can say that becomes a part of their schooling, and that is the reason why he or she aims to learn the language as an important component of their study. So, this is one of the typical difference when it comes to second language learning and of course young and older learners. There are some other important aspects that we need to keep in mind, that young learners, they do not have as such a big prior knowledge with regard to their surroundings. So, basically they are in the process of forming their schema, or you can say they are in the process of forming their knowledge, which they will further use it as a prior knowledge. However, when it comes to older learners, they already have stored a lot of information, and therefore you can say that whatever they will use in their language classroom or outside of their classroom, they will refer to what has already happened in their young age. Now, coming up to the next slide, we will try to look up at the instrumental and integrative enforcements, since these are important concepts, and these will tell you that how a learner can integrate motivation in his or her language learning pedagogy. So, if I talk about the instrumental enforcements, I would say that a learner is basically motivated by himself, or he or she is taking it out as a source of passion. However, when it comes to integrative, then he is likely to expand his language learning in a better situation, or you can say in a better surrounding, or he or she is likely to use this information in real life situations. So, at times it happens, like we studied in the last session, there are some motivational drives which enforces the learner to go through certain aspects, and we also realize that learners do not come with an empty mind, rather they are coming up with lot of points that they really would like to forward to take it from here. So, we need to understand that what is the motivation that is driving them, and why they are coming with the purpose of why they are coming to take language education as an important part of their development. So, these are some of the important considerations that one should always take into consideration, and understanding their enforcements, understanding their motivation, understanding their strengths and weaknesses, you can say their nature and attitude will help the educator to understand the language pedagogy in an efficient way, and it will enhance their growth not only in terms of intellect but also in terms of understanding the world in a better way. Therefore, we can say that there is an important concept when we talk about language learning as far as the young learners are concerned, because we saw that some students get the learning after a certain age. However, some students are grown up into the language. So, Krashen, who is one of the important linguists in this era, has tried to distinguish the two important concepts, and he has said that there is a sharp differentiation between language learning and language acquisition, and especially he has referred SLL as second language learning and SLA as second language acquisition. So, second language learning refers to the learning which takes place after a certain period of life, or you can say that you consciously learn this language by understanding its grammatical features, and you try to place the word order, and then you go through with vocabulary items and understand in this way. However, second language acquisition talks about those developmental factors which take place at a very early age. It does not let the learner to go through the grammatical aspects like phonology or morphology or syntax or semantics. Rather, a learner gradually finds himself developing in the language, and whenever or wherever this stimuli is being given to the learner, he or she is likely to use it frequently. Therefore, this is the main distinction which SLL, that is second language learner, and or you can say second language learning and second language acquisition is being distinguished upon. Now, going on to the another important concept, that is critical period hypothesis. This is very important because it talks about the developmental factors when it comes to the acquisition and learning of language. And let me tell you, dear learners, that there has been a lot of debate that whether we as Indian speakers are learning the language or acquiring the language. However, later it was clarified that we are the second language learners, and we will see that how it goes under the light of critical period hypothesis, which is largely discussed in the linguistics and in the English language teaching pedagogy. So, I'm referring to this slide, critical period hypothesis, and it claims that there is an ideal time to acquire language in a linguistically rich environment, or you can say language acquisition becomes more difficult after a certain period. So, language acquisition is easier at a young age and it becomes difficult at a later age. Easy at young age, as I am writing over here, and difficult at a later stage. So, does that imply that older learners cannot learn English, or older learners cannot learn language, or does this mean that older and young learners cannot be compared when it comes to language learning, or does this reveal that language learning is not the language learning process is not same when it comes to older learners and younger learners. So, we will try to find out what is the actual idea behind this hypothesis which is being claimed. Let me tell you that this states as a first few years of life which are considered as the crucial time in which an individual acquires first language, okay, first language with adequate stimuli. Now, here stimuli refers to the input which a child gets while growing up. Sometimes we see that when a child is growing, he or she gets a lot of knowledge, a lot of exposure with regard to the usage of the language. Therefore, we see that this child starts imitating the language, and therefore gradually he acquires the entire language. Basically, a child starts with fragmented words. He or she starts with words which are spoken in isolation, but later on he develops a full frame in which the language is used in a more adequate way, and of course contextualized utterances are being then spoken at the age of 3 or a little later if there is a delay in the speech. Therefore, you can say that if language input does not occur after this time at the age which is very critical, or you can say which is very important, where the acquisition or where the learning takes place, at that point of time, if the stimuli does not take place in an adequate manner, then we will realize that the learner may or may not get a full command of language. So, there is much debate, however, over the time of the critical period, that it is whether the age between 2 and 13th, and if this varies. However, this particular hypothesis has faced a lot of criticism as well. Let me tell you that from where this particular hypothesis come from. This is derived from the concept of critical period in the biological sciences, which refers to a set period in which an organism must acquire a skill, or you can say ability, or strictly speaking the experimentally verified critical period relates to a span during which damage to the visual system can occur. For example, if animals are deprived of the necessary binocular input for developing stereopsis. So, we can here conclude that critical period hypothesis has given a significant contribution as far as the language learning and language acquisition is concerned. It has revealed certain important aspects that language can be acquired at a period of time. However, there is a debate and there are concerns that language can be learned at a later stage as well. Now, coming up to the point which is mentioned here is as universal grammar. This is an important notion which was given by Professor Noam Chomsky, and Chomsky said that environmental factors must be relatively unimportant. So, here I am writing environmental factors are unimportant. Why? Because he claims that language is already hardwired into the brain when a child has not even taken birth. in the world. Therefore, there are so many factors that contributes to the universal grammar, the concept which Chomsky has given, and in the universal grammar he has given a term called language acquisition device. Right. So, learners, we can say that language acquisition device is an important component in anybody's life, because it tells the user to use language in a way. And as Chomsky mentioned, that environmental factors are not as important as we need to think. Rather, it is all about the language acquisition device which is already present in our brain, and therefore you can say that there are innate principles that guides the child to use a language in a order, right. So, let me give you an example over here, that when a child starts speaking, then does he or she follow any grammatical rule, or do you think that this child starts taking the note of the word order or tenses or something like this? I am sure your answer would be no. Why? Because a child gets a stimuli, and then after getting the stimuli, he or she tries to formulate his own language. So, the question here is, from where does he know that this is the word order? From where he knows that this is the subject, this is the verb, and I have to place the first subject and then the later the verb, or the later object, or vice versa, because in English we follow a different word order, in Hindi we follow a different word order, and similarly the other languages. So, we need to look up at those factors which say that language comes adequately, and it is not that a child, or you can say that a young learner needs to learn, rather he automatically, or you can say he or she gradually learns it. So, the answer to these questions is of universal grammar, which Chomsky has mentioned in his important guidelines, and he said that it is because of the innate principle, it is because of the language acquisition device which is already there in the brain. So, when a child is exposed to the language, he or she automatically starts making the sense out of it and arrange the important components of the language in a sequential way. Now, going on to the next important slide, it says that what are the other influences in second language learning, and there are three important notes that are being mentioned over here. First is the natural situation, the second is the classroom situation, and the third is the attitude. So, let us go step by step and find out what does the natural situation mean. A natural situation for second language learning is one where the second language is experienced in a situation, you can say. In a situation, and that is similar to the native language. So, one of the important scholars, Steinberg, in 2001, he states that children can learn second language faster than adults, and because this happens because of being in natural situation. So, it simply refers to the idea that if a young learner is being exposed, or you can say is being given a situation where he or she is supposed to use the language, then the learning takes place in an easier way and in an efficient way. Now, going on to the second point, it says classroom situation. So, what is classroom situation? Here the situation remains slightly constrained. Here situation is not as wider as the natural situation is. So, what does the classroom situation refers to? Basically, the classroom is isolated from other social life. So, you can say that the classroom for second language learning is a planned situation, or you can say it is a planned classroom where you plan tasks or where you plan activities, or you make your learners think about a particular aspect. Therefore, the teacher is the one who knows the social life, and in the room there is a teacher and the students, or you can say there is a teacher and the learners. So, teacher is the one who knows the second language, and the students are those who are aiming to learn the language. So, in the space of the classroom, nothing happens unless the teacher makes it happen, right? And in the classroom, students do not act as they want. They would take a guide, or they would work under the teacher, and they would take advices of the teacher. The teacher would give an environment, would provide a context setting to perform. Therefore, it would be slightly restricted, slightly narrowed as compared to the natural situation. And the best thing to distinguish between natural situation and classroom situation is that in natural one, the factors are very much unpredictable. You never know what is going to influence whom, and therefore, you can think of the classroom situation where everything is planned and everything comes in an order. Therefore, a child when he or she learns in a natural situation is likely to get language in an efficient way, and also gets the platform to respond, to react, and get varieties when it comes to the exposure. But what about the classroom situation? If natural situation gives immense opportunities to the learner, then does classroom situation also provides any opportunity? So, it is up to the teacher. If a teacher brings diversity into the classroom, or you can say if a teacher makes a class learner centered. In other words, if I say that teacher makes this class interesting and also makes it more natural, then there are chances that students get opportunities, and also they are likely to use language in an efficient way. Therefore, natural situation is one which happens gradually and which you cannot ignore or you cannot avoid, but classroom situation is where you can make things, where you can plan things, and you can work accordingly. Now, another important factor which is mentioned in this slide is attitude. So, what is attitude? Attitude is about the learner, and of course, when we talk about attitude, we basically categorize into two important types, negative and the positive attitude. So, it becomes easier for an educator to encourage a person who comes with a positive attitude, and not just it happens with the older learners, but also with younger learners. But imagine a situation where the learner is discouraged, or the learner is not willing to take part in the language classroom, or you can say if the learner doesn't find enough motivation to attend the class, then what does happen at that point of time? You can say it is up to the educator that how he brings diversity, how he respects the emotional and psychological factors which are influencing the learner, and also how he or she is going to make this attitude a better one. So, attitude constitutes a very important part in anyone's learning pedagogy, and that's how we differentiate between the natural situation, classroom situation, and attitude, which influence not only the learner but also the educator. So, going on to this slide, let's try to look up at learner's profile. I'm sure after looking up this slide, you might have a question that what is learner's profile, or what is the need of the learner's profile, or why are we creating learner's profile? Does that make any sense? Does that have any significance when it comes to teaching? So, let me tell you that as it is written in this slide, a learner's profile is a document, or you can say it is a conversation that takes place between the learner and the educator, and it helps the educators to learn more about their students. So, as I discussed in the last session also, and we have been trying to put these aspects in this session as well, that learners let learners come with heterogeneity, they come with variety of experiences, they come with a lot of factors which can be in the form of psychological, social, emotional or affective factors. So, the question here is that if we incorporate learners profile in the language teaching pedagogy, then how it is going to help them, and how it is going to help the teacher. So, the utmost, or you can say the ultimate answer is that language teaching becomes easier, or you can say it becomes more comprehensible, it becomes more extensive when you incorporate learners' views, learners' perspectives, learners' preferences, and of course their choices with regard to their styles, with regard to their intake, with regard to their speed of learning. Therefore, you see that some students are highly competent, some students they approach towards a modest speed, and also we find some students who are quite novice, they really do not have a much background of language. So, they are coming with almost an empty mind and thinking that teacher will give them everything about the language. So, it is important to look up at the profile, and this will help the teacher to design activities and tasks, and also it will help the teacher to find out which skills to be focused more. And moreover, one of the important thing is that when you know the person's strengths and weaknesses, or when you know the person's interests, then you are inclined to produce things which are more interesting for them, because here in second language learning, interests play a very prominent role. If a learner starts taking interest, then he or she is likely to acquire language easily and quickly. However, when it happens that however, when strengths and interests are not being identified, then language learning becomes slightly difficult, or you can say it becomes slightly not open to the perspectives that learners keep with regard to their interests. So, what I am trying to mention over here is that there are several points that one should consider when creating a profile, be a older, younger, be a older learner or young learner. And also it is important to think about the passions, it is important to think about the likes and dislikes, because if a learner see, or finds himself in indulging those activities, or you can say indulging in indulging in the learning style which he has not preferred so far, so it is going to create a little complex for him. So, as you know that we have been discussing about the traditional methods of teaching, right? We discussed that how in older how in the last classes, or you can say how in the in the olden times, teacher used to take a central position in the class, and learners were given less opportunities, or you can say almost no opportunities to express themselves. But then there came the idea of diversity, there came the idea of putting up their views, the opportunities, platforms, democracy and so on. So, coming up this when these perspectives were introduced and they were given value, then educators realized that learners profile will help them to contribute in an efficient way, and not only to prepare specific materials, but also help the learners outside the classroom and inside the classroom. Now, the question here is, what are the important contents that learners profile should include, or what are the important considerations you are going to incorporate when it comes to learners profile. So, here is the list as you see in this slide. First is the skills, strengths and interests. So, what is the person's skill? If you see that there is any artistic skill, for example, then you can use Pictionary to help learners demonstrate several important vocabulary items, or you can help learners to draw something and ask other peer members to identify what does this particular thing is called. So, in this way you will be able to understand that what is their inclination, what special skill do they possess. Nowadays we have total physical response as well. So, if students are interested in doing physical activity, you can just demonstrate, you can say and give command and students will perform at the same time. You say jump and students would start jumping. You say turn right or turn left and see how students follow your command. In this way they acquire language, they get a lot of fun, and moreover they find themselves connected with the activities which are being given in the language classroom. Right. Now, coming up to their strengths, because as mentioned again and again that strengths create a person, and strengths provide power to students, right. They provide, strengths provide enhancement to learners. Therefore, if we consider their strengths, maybe they are having a good oratory skills and they might be lacking some of the important guidelines. So, if you give them a task to speak, and if you give them to come and address students, and you assign tasks like you are speaking in a public gathering, then they will find themselves more connected. Also, they will get an idea that their perspectives are getting valued, their strength is being valued, and they are not only getting chance to enhance their language, but also getting chance to illustrate their strengths, right. Now, what is their interest? Let me tell you that there is a sharp differentiation between interest and hobbies, because hobbies is something which we regularly pursue, but interest is something in which we are inclined to. For example, adventure activities. So, adventure activities you can say that they cannot be practiced regularly. However, hobbies are something which are cultivated regularly, which become the part of our life. Or you can also think that hobbies are something which you are through which you are connected with. Therefore, if a person's interest is in music, or you can say if a person interest in arts, or if a person has interest in games and so on, so you can make tasks, or you can give them opportunities to do certain things on the basis of their which matches to their interest, and then fundamentally you can provide feedback further to them. then their aspirations and passions, what is making them to learn language, what is their aspiration behind it, and what is the thing which is bringing them into the classroom. That matters a lot. So, what is their passion, what is their aspiration, what do they want to become, how are they going to use this language in their future, how this language is going to help them as far as their future prospects are concerned. So, these are the important things that you should always take care, and this will help you to identify that this learner is going to use your lessons in a specific domain or in a specific area. Now, coming up to likes and dislikes. Since likes and dislikes are important for a learner's profile, now let us understand what life experiences can help the learner and the educator as far as their profiles are concerned. So, life experiences, it tells a lot about a person. So, you can think of their background as far as their life experience is concerned, and you can think about their friends or their social circles in which they are enrolled in. If there is any memorable incident that they would like to share, this will reveal that reveal a lot about their emotional, psychological, and you can say social influences that is happening to the learner's profile, or that is happening to the learner's life. Therefore, experiences reveal a lot about a person's about decision making, about growth, about their utility, their idea of using this particular class in the next, or you can say in the later part of their lives. So, life experiences reveal not just the person's perception, but also gives a chance to the educator understand the learner in a better way, and also respect the diversity that he brings when it comes to the incidents, that comes to the experiences. And we should not forget that not all experiences are good. Some children or some learners might have gone through some bad life experiences as well. So, how are you going to incorporate learning so that their bad experiences, or you can say their life, their experiences which were not really important. So, when we talk about life experiences, it tells a lot about the learner's real life, because it has a lot of constituents in it. For example, one can easily identify social, psychological and emotional influences that have been taking place in a human's nature. Therefore, if you are looking to design a learner profile and also you are looking to teach them, you need to understand what this person has gone through, and we cannot forget that not every learner has a good experience with regard to language learning, or with regard to other subjects, or maybe with regard to the other important constituents of their lives, be it emotional or psychological happenings. So, it is important to look up at the life experiences as an important, as an essential component, because it will give a lot of clue about the learner's decision making, about the learner's growth, and also about the progressiveness that he or she consists of, because that would reveal about the learner's growth in a setting. And we cannot forget the point that when it comes to bad experiences, a teacher, or you can say an educator, should not be the person who ignores or who avoids or who does not respect. Rather, a teacher should understand and should go into the learner's shoes to identify what has happened, and if counseling can help emotionally, then I I think it would really help the learner and the educator both. Sometimes we also observe that when it comes to language teaching or when it comes to the school teaching, then learners were enforced to memorize the language concepts. They were asked to memorize grammatical rules. However, some were not really good at graphic memory and they came out with bad marks, and therefore they were on the verge of conclusion that they can't learn language. But I think there comes a role of a good educator. This educator can help the learner understand the value of understanding in context, and can tell that this was just a part of a graphic memory, and it is better to learn language in context, it is better to demonstrate skills, it is better to learn in more enhanced way, so that life experiences, so that better orientation can happen with better orientation can happen in language learning process. Now, one important component, as it is mentioned here in the slide, is how the learner likes to learn. In the last session, I discussed about the auditory and visual component, or you can say auditory and visual inclination of the learner. Some learners come and say that they really don't want to read books because they have found themselves out of the context, or you can say they have not been able to understand the tough vocabulary, and sometimes they are not really interested in reading those long pages. However, when it comes to audio visual aids, they are more inclined and they effectively learn. So, you can definitely prescribe, or I can say advise those materials which are more enhanced and have auditory and visual mode. However, we say that reading is one of the important habits, and because it promotes learning, it makes the learner better in writing and speaking. Therefore, you can say that one needs to consciously read the book, one needs not to procrastinate when reading book. So, in this way a learner will be able to generate interest when it comes to reading. Now, coming up to the last point of this slide, it is struggles or potential barriers to learning. This is an important component because it will help you to understand that why your course or why your paper is not really progressing when it comes to their outcome, or you can easily identify that after knowing the potential barriers. Your learners, when you get to know about these struggles or potential barriers that are happening at the level of students or happening at the level of educator, then you are likely to work on that particular aspect and move gradually. Going on to the next slide, this can be done by the learner, and I am sure this can be done at a little later age when the learner is aiming to learn language as a second language, and therefore, if you give this task to the older learners, they will be able to write and express themselves freely. So, as you can see, it gives a detail about the learner who come at a later stage, and one of the important points, as it is mentioned here, is cultural connections and experiences. So, cultural connections, like what is the culture do they belong to, what experiences have they encountered so far, and is there going to make any significance as far as the language learning, second language, English as second language learning is concerned, or do you think that we can imbibe all the cultures together and introduce language there. When we talk about language, we cannot separate culture because both are inseparable and interrelated entities. we also have to understand that what language is or you can say which language is spoken when it comes to the learner himself. So, does he use this English language, or does he use any regional language, or does he use any other language frequently? If he or she is very much inclined to learn second language, then what is the amount, or you can say what is the probability of using this language in the outer world or in the real life situations in the outside the classroom. So, you need to look up at that language spoken perspective. The more the learner uses the language outside the classroom is likely to learn efficiently inside the classroom. Another important point that is mentioned here in this slide is things that student is good at. So, at some skills learners are good at, but at some skills learners are bad at. For example, a learner may be good at listening but may be bad at speaking, right? Or maybe it happens vice versa. Learner may good at listening and speaking but bad at reading and writing. So, what do you think is the strength? What do you think is the weakness? If there is a weakness which is significant and which should not be ignored, then you can drop your advice there, you can drop your important lessons there and make their weaknesses as strengths. Now, as I mentioned in the last slide, memorable life experiences matter because these important stories tell a lot about person's growth. It tells social, emotional and psychological factors. Therefore, you can understand a learner in a comprehensible way. Now, the point is how they like to relax. So, some would like to spend time with friends, some like to pursue their hobbies, some like to watch television, some like to play internet games which are available on internet, and some like to work and cook dishes for their family. So, what do you think they are likely to do in their free time, or how are they going to relax themselves when it comes to when it comes to the relaxation? How are they going to put their efforts? So, in this way you can make wonders. As an educator, you can think that if a person is interested in conversation, or he or she is more interested in social networking, then you can assign tasks and you can give them topics, you can indulge that person into more relaxing mood. Therefore, if you find that a person is inclined towards cooking new dishes, for example, so you can ask that how to cook a favorite dish of yours, right? So, a person would make a presentation, will talk about ingredients, will talk about the procedure, will talk about the taste, and also he or she will discuss about its historical significance with regard to the dish. So, you can think of those factors which a learner does at the time of relaxation, and there you feel a magic that learner is learner has started using language in an efficient way, and also feels relaxed, more comfortable, more enjoyable in using language. Therefore, likes and interests, as I mentioned in the last slide, it is important. It directs a learner, it tells about the preferences, and it enhances the creativity, flexibility with regard to their interests also comes in when it comes to likes and their dislikes. So, another important thing is how they like to learn and what helps, things what make it hard for them to learn, what they do when they need help. So, how they like to learn and what helps. If they like to learn with games, then of course you can provide a lot of material with games. However, when it comes to the heterogeneity, some like to play games, some like to play some like to make paintings, some like to socialize, or some have games as their important like. So, what you can do, you can emerge as a person who includes variety of tasks and activities. So, in this way you will be able to bridge the gap between people who come up with differences, with difference of likes, with difference of opinions. And there, as the second last point which is mentioned here is the things that make it hard for them to learn. If you think that memorization, in fact memorization is always discouraged in language learning, it is never been a matter of learning by heart. But if you think that a certain way is not really interested to them and you can bring a change, then you can definitely do. And what they do when they need help, so in this way you will get to know that if a person is needing help, or if the learner is really not expressive when it comes to the requirement or when it comes to the need, then what you should do at that point of time. This idea will make an educator an inclusive one, and it will promote the concept of learner centered class. There are some important considerations that I would quickly go. First is the age of the learner, because it will determine whether the learner is old or young, and in that way you will be able to understand that if this language is going to be processed as learning or acquisition, then you are going to talk about that whether this learning is exposed already or not. If the learner is already have a knowledge of language or not, then there is immersion, how much knowledge does he or she incorporates. Then there is about intelligence. When we talk about intelligence, we refer to multiple intelligence. I can just give you an example that you can't ask a fish to climb tree, right? Similarly, you can't ask monkey to swim. So, everybody has a different intelligence, everybody has a different capability, and if you give them a difference in, if you give them a different task which they are not able to do so, something which is out of their zone, something which is out of their horizon, then they are likely to feel more discouraged, or you can say they are likely to have less interest in learning. Then there is a personality, if they are extrovert or introvert. If there is an extrovert, what sort of a social networking do they possess, and if there is introvertness, then how do they express themselves, and what inclination would you get when it comes to their immersion. Therefore, attitude, negative or positive. If there is negative, you can always try your best to change their motivation, and you can take the help of motivational talks which can help the learners change their attitude or improve their attitude rather. Then sensory style, whether the learner is inclined towards visual or auditory. Then you have strategies, for example, are they going to learn through the traditional method? Are they really looking forward to listen to you, or they are willing to participate in themselves? If they are willing to participate, then at what level and what is the task in which they are going to contribute in. Therefore, strategy is important. Also, that are they going to learn grammatical things, or they are going to learn communicative, or you can say the appropriacy of the language. So, if your focus is more on the appropriacy, so it means you need to look up at the modern approaches which are available in the language pedagogy, and we will discuss in the later session of this course. Then we have motivation, very much interrelated to attitude. As you see that strategies is there, and then there is motivation. Strategies will tell you that what sort of tactics you are going to apply in your classroom to bring their attention in, and also motivation when it comes to the encouragement, when it comes to increasing their interest in language learning. Now, this is the summary. After this session, this is the summary, and in this session we discussed about the key components of the second language pedagogy, which include integrative and instrumental reinforcements. We talk about the second language learning and second language acquisition, the difference between these two. Then we also understood the idea of critical period hypothesis, which states that the first few years are important for the development of language. And we also talked about that children are postulated to create new connections daily and may handle the language learning process more effectively than do adults. Chomsky talked about universal grammar, where he discussed about the availability of language acquisition device, and also we learned how to create a learner's profile, what important components should you include. The main components of the learner's profile should include age. You should be able to distinguish old and young learners, how much language they learn, and what is their exposure with regard to their usages, what is their immersion with regard to the language, and what intelligence do they form, and what kind of personality do they have when it comes to the language learning. So, these are the references. With this, we have come to an end of this session. Thank you very much for joining.